10 things. That is all this is. Not a system, not a philosophy you need 3 books to understand. 10 specific things I learned across a life of building and failing and building again that I wish someone had told me plainly before I lost years finding them out the hard way. Some of these I ignored for a long time after I knew them. A few of them I only understood after a failure made the lesson unavoidable. One of them is the thing that made all the others possible, and I am going to tell you which one that is when we get to it. Stay with me, because by the time this ends, at least one of these 10 will be the thing you needed to hear today. I am Henry Ford. Before the factories, before the cars, before any of it, I was a man who made a lot of expensive mistakes, took a long time to learn from some of them, and eventually built something that changed how the world moved. I do not tell you that to establish myself. I tell you that because the advice that follows is not advice I read somewhere. It is advice I paid for with real years and real losses. That is the only kind worth listening to. Listen to this every day. The first time it will feel like instruction. The second time it will feel like a mirror. The first thing is the one I should have understood before anything else. And I did not understand it clearly until I had already wasted the better part of several years because of it. Most people confuse movement with progress. They spend their days in motion, meetings, conversations, decisions, planning, reviewing what was planned, adjusting what was reviewed, and at the end of a full day of motion, they have the feeling of having worked hard. Some of them have worked hard, but working hard and moving the building forward are 2 different things. And most of the motion in a given day does not move the building forward. It maintains the current state. It responds to the current demands. It keeps everything from getting worse. Maintenance, effort, and building effort both feel like work. Only building effort accumulates. Put it into practice this way. At the end of each day, ask one question. What specifically exists now that did not exist this morning because of what I did today? Not what was dealt with. Not what was responded to, what was built. If the answer is nothing, the day was maintenance, not building. Maintenance days are unavoidable and necessary. But a life that is predominantly maintenance days does not produce a built thing at the end of it. Count the building days. Increase them deliberately. Even one genuine building action per day, every day, accumulates into something real over a year. The measurement is what makes it visible. And visible things get managed in ways that invisible things do not. Every other piece of advice I am going to give you only works if the hours you apply it in are building hours. Advice applied during maintenance hours produces maintained maintenance. That is not what any of it is for. Second follows directly from this, and it is the one most people discover only after they have already made the expensive version of the mistake. The second thing is about who you listen to. And this one hurt me specifically because I learned it by ignoring it. In the years before the Ford Motor Company was established, I took advice from 2 categories of people. The first category was people who had built the specific kind of thing I was trying to build and whose building had worked. The second category was people who were intelligent and well-meaning and had strong opinions about what would and would not work without having built the specific kind of thing I was building. The advice from the first category was specific, grounded in real experience, and useful even when it was difficult to hear. The advice from the second category was confident, frequently delivered with genuine care for my success, and almost entirely useless as a guide to the actual building. Those people are not wrong about everything. That is what makes this hard. They may be very intelligent, they may understand many things deeply. What they cannot have is the specific calibration that comes from having built the specific thing you are building and having encountered its specific failure modes. Their advice is theoretical where it needs to be practical. It is general where it needs to be specific. And it sounds nearly identical to the advice from the first category, which makes it very difficult to filter in the moment. My filter, once I finally built it, was simple and brutal. Has this person built the specific thing, or something close enough to it that the terrain is genuinely familiar? If yes, full weight. If no, polite receipt and private discount to near zero. This sounds harsh, and it is somewhat harsh. It is also the only filter I found that consistently separated useful signal from well-intentioned noise. The difficulty in applying this filter is identifying who belongs in the first category. People in the first category are not necessarily famous or publicly credentialed. They are people who have built the specific kind of thing you are building, not as a theory, not as an observation from the outside, but as a person who has sat with the specific problems of that specific kind of building and found specific ways through them. That person might be someone nobody has heard of. They might be someone you have to search to find. Finding them is worth significant effort because a single conversation with someone in the first category is worth months of conversations with people in the second. How do you know when you have found a Category 1 person? They ask different questions. Category 2 people react to your description and give you their assessment of the direction. Category 1, people ask questions that reveal they understand the terrain, questions about the specific problems you have not yet solved, the specific failure modes they encountered in similar work, the specific junctions where the work got harder than expected. Their questions show you they know the inside of the thing. Category 2, people do not know the inside of the thing, and their reactions, however confident and well-intentioned, do not know it either. Seek the Category 1 people. They are rare. When you find one, ask everything. Listen longer than you think you should. The conversation with a Category 1 person has a specific texture that is unmistakable once you have experienced it. It feels less like receiving advice and more like someone turning on a light in a room you had been navigating in, the dark. The third thing is the one I almost did not include, because stating it plainly risks sounding like something a man says when he wants to protect himself from being corrected. But I am going to state it anyway, because the version of it I am describing is different from that, and the difference is important. Apply it. You will lose some relationships briefly when the people in the second category notice that their advice is no longer shifting your direction. Most of them will respect the seriousness it implies once they see what the seriousness produces. Third, and this one, I am most reluctant to state plainly, because it sounds like something a man says when he wants to avoid criticism more than he wants to grow. But I have thought about it enough to believe it is genuinely true, so I will say it. Most criticism that arrives from outside the building is not about the building. It is about the person delivering the criticism feeling something when they see the building, usually either the discomfort of their own unrealized direction reflected back at them, or the legitimate frustration of someone who sees a problem in the building that they lack the influence to address any other way. Both of these are real. Neither of them is primarily about improving your building. Useful criticism has exactly 3 characteristics. First, it comes from someone who understands the specific context of the building, not the general principles of building, the specific context of yours. Second, it identifies a specific problem and ideally a specific alternative. General criticism of direction or character is almost never useful. Specific identification of a specific problem is almost always worth examining. Third, it is delivered by someone who has something real at stake in the outcome, an investor, a partner, a key person whose work depends on the building going well. People with real stakes give criticism that is aimed at improving the outcome. People without real stakes give criticism that is aimed at something else. Take the 3 characteristic criticisms seriously. Take the rest politely and file it where it belongs. George is the story I told you about the engineer who defended his work instead of improving it. But there is a second half to that story that I did not tell you yet. And the second half is the part that contains the actual lesson. George eventually left the company, not because of any single incident, but because the pattern of defending work rather than improving it meant that the work stopped improving. The quality plateaued. The problems that were being successfully defended against change became the same problems that eventually made the work less valuable than the newer approaches that arrived without the history of defended decisions around them. George was still defending the original approach long after the original approach had been surpassed. The defense had been so thorough, so sustained, so successful at keeping the original approach intact, that the original approach never became something better. Best defense of any work is a better version of it. If the criticism is correct, the better version addresses the specific problem. If the criticism is incorrect, the better version makes that obvious without any argument required. An argument against criticism says, "This work is good despite what you see." A better version of the work says, Here is the evidence. One requires winning an argument. The other requires doing the work. Only one of these adds to the building, and only one of them can silence criticism in a way that lasts. Next time criticism arrives, before you decide how to respond to it, ask one question. Is there a version of this work that makes the criticism irrelevant by being better than the current version? If yes, build that version instead of spending the time on the response. The response will have been made by the time you finish. Patience is next, but not the kind most people mean when they say the word. This version is harder, and it is the only kind that actually produces what patience is supposed to produce. There was a man I worked with in the early years of the company, a very capable engineer named George, who had a specific habit that I watched cost him enormously over the years I knew him. George responded to every criticism of his work with the same energy he brought to the building itself. Someone would observe that a design decision seemed questionable, and George would spend the next 2 days defending the decision with full effort, writing letters, arranging conversations, making the case in detail. The defense was often successful. George was usually right, and the 2 days spent defending the work were 2 days not spent improving it, which meant the work that attracted the criticism in the first place did not get better during the period when George was defending it. Improve the work instead of defending it. The best defense of any work is a better version of it. If the criticism is correct, the better version addresses the problem. If the criticism is incorrect, the better version makes that obvious without any argument required. Listen to this again tomorrow. The third and fourth things often take a second hearing before they settle. Patience is the fourth thing, but not the patience most people mean when they use the word. The patience most people mean is the endurance of waiting, holding on until circumstances improve, sustaining the current effort until the results arrive. That kind of patience is real and necessary, but it is the passive version. The patience I am describing is active. It is the specific capacity to stay in the building phase of something without needing it to produce visible results at the pace the ambition would prefer. Every significant thing I built went through a phase that I think of as the underground phase, the period when the work was happening and the work was real and the direction was right, but nothing about the visible surface of things had changed yet. The foundation was being laid. But a foundation is invisible until you build the house on it, and while you are building the foundation, you are working at full effort and producing nothing visible. Most people who abandon good directions abandon them during this phase, not because the evidence says the direction is wrong, but because the absence of visible progress feels like evidence that it is. Being in the underground phase is not evidence against the direction. It is the evidence that the direction is real enough to require a foundation. Easy things do not have underground phases. Things that can be built quickly and visibly in the first few weeks are not the things that eventually produce significant results. The significant results come from things that required a foundation period, which means the patience to build in the underground phase is not just a personality trait that some people have and others do not. It is the specific capacity that separates the builders of significant things from the builders of small things. Stay in the underground phase. Not blindly keep examining the direction for specific evidence that the approach needs correcting, but stay in it. The foundation is being built. The house comes after. Underground phase has specific psychological characteristics that I want to name, because recognizing them is what makes it possible to stay in it, rather than treating it as evidence that the direction is wrong. First characteristic: asymmetry between effort and visible result. You are putting in real effort, and the visible output is minimal or invisible. This asymmetry is the normal condition of foundation building. You are not experiencing a signal that the effort is insufficient. You are experiencing the normal gap between the effort that goes into a foundation and the appearance of a foundation, which looks like nothing from the outside, until the building on top of it makes the foundation's presence obvious. Second characteristic: the quiet question that arrives during difficult days. How do I know this is the underground phase and not just a direction that is not working? This is a real question, and it deserves a real answer. The underground phase and a direction that is not working feel similar from the inside. The difference is in the quality of the evidence you have accumulated about whether the approach is moving toward something viable. An underground phase has accumulating evidence, small indicators that the direction is viable, specific problems that are getting solved even when they are not yet visible as output, a growing clarity about what the finished thing needs to look like, a direction that is not working, has the same absence of visible progress, but without the accumulating evidence. The questions get harder rather than clearer. The same problems reappear without resolution. The specific things that needed to be solved remain unsolved after multiple attempts. If the evidence is accumulating, you are in the underground phase. If the evidence is not accumulating, you may need to change the approach, not the direction. The approach. Hold the distinction between direction and approach carefully. The direction, if it is real, survives multiple wrong approaches on the way to the right one. 5 is the one I ignored the longest, and I want to be direct about what it cost me to ignore it. I was not easy to be around during the years of heavy building. Not because I was unkind, I hope I was not unkind, but because the intensity of the building direction meant that everything that was not the building felt like friction. Conversations that were not about the work felt like delays. Time that was not building, time felt like waste. Clara bore most of this, and she bore it with a patience that I did not fully appreciate until I was far enough past it to see it clearly. Sustained total consumption by the building has a specific cost. The people who sustain you during the building pay a price they did not sign up to pay. And if the price becomes high enough for long enough, even the most patient people eventually make the reasonable decision to put some distance between themselves and the source of the consumption. I did not lose Clara, but there were years where I came close to losing the quality of what we had, and the closeness of that would have cost me more than any company failure ever could have. Because Clara was the specific person who held the foundation of the life that the building was supposed to serve. Building is supposed to serve the life. When building starts consuming the life it was supposed to serve, something has gone wrong in the priorities. Keep the protected time for building. But keep the protected time for the people the building is for. 1 hour a day for the building, protected. 1 dinner at full presence with no building in the room, protected. Both things must exist. The building that destroys what it was supposed to create has built the wrong thing. What I learned from those years is something I could not have been told in advance, because the learning required the experience of nearly losing it. The version of me that existed before the building years would have agreed intellectually with the principle of protecting the life alongside the work. The version of me that existed after those years agreed with it in the way that a person agrees with something that has been demonstrated rather than just stated. The demonstration was the gradual narrowing of the distance between Clara and me during the periods of heaviest building, and the specific effort required to rebuild that distance into closeness when the building phase was complete enough to allow it. What I want to tell you that I could not have heard then is this. The quality of your presence with the people who matter to you is not recoverable in the same form after it has been absent for long enough. You can rebuild closeness, but the specific version of closeness that existed before the extended absence is not the thing you rebuild. You build something new, and the new version can be as good or better. But the cost of the absence is real, and the debt is paid by both of you, not just by you. 1 hour for the work, protected. 1 meal at full presence, protected. Not because the work deserves less, because the life the work is building toward deserves to exist during the building of it. A man who reaches the destination he was building toward and finds the things he was building for are no longer there has built the wrong thing, however impressive the building looks from the outside. 6 follows directly from 5, and it is the one that surprised me most when I understood it. The people who produce the most tend to do less than the people who produce the least, not less work, less activity. The distinction is between high output focused work on a single direction and high volume activity distributed across many directions. The second feels more productive from the inside. It is not. Think of it this way. Water running through a single channel at full volume moves things. The same volume of water distributed across 50 small channels barely dampens the ground. The force is in the direction of the flow. Distribute the flow and you distribute the force until there is none left. This is what happens to the productive energy of a person who is working on 12 things simultaneously. Each thing receives a fraction of the capacity that the thing requires to actually move. The illusion is that 12 things at 10% are more than one thing at 100%. They are not. 12 things at 10% produce 12 incomplete things that each have 90% of their potential work still undone. One thing at 100% produces one complete thing that is actually finished. Choose one primary direction, not one project forever, one primary direction for this period of building. Everything else waits until the primary direction has reached the point where it can sustain itself without full attention. Then the next thing becomes primary, sequentially, not simultaneously. The sequential builder finishes things. The simultaneous builder is always in progress and rarely in completion. Simultaneous building has a specific internal experience that makes the simultaneous approach hard to abandon, even after its costs become visible. Working on many things at once feels more responsive, more adaptive, more alive to opportunity. When one thing is going badly, you move to another. When a new possibility appears, you can incorporate it. The simultaneous approach feels more intelligent than the sequential one, because it seems to use more of the available opportunity space. Distributing attention actually prevents any single thing from receiving enough sustained attention to complete its foundation. Everything on the simultaneous list has progress measured in days per week rather than days per day. A thing that receives 2 days of attention per week takes 5 weeks to accomplish what it would have accomplished in 2 weeks of full attention. But the 2 weeks of full attention are not available because the other things on the simultaneous list have claims on the same resource. The result is that everything takes longer. Nothing gets the compound benefit of full sustained attention, and the simultaneous builder is perpetually in progress and rarely in completion. Completion matters more than most people building things acknowledge. Completing one significant thing has a specific effect on what becomes possible next. It creates a foundation that the next thing can build on, a credibility that attracts the resources the next thing needs, a clarity that comes only from having followed a direction to its conclusion rather than to its temporary interruption. Partial completion of many things produces none of this. A portfolio of partially completed things is not a foundation. It is evidence of dispersed attention and a series of abandoned efforts, and it does not build toward anything in the way that even a single completed thing does. Finish one thing, then choose the next one. 7 is the one that catches most capable people at exactly the moment they most need not to be caught by it. The timing of this mistake is the specific reason it costs so much. 7. I want to state as a practical rule rather than a principle, because principles without practical rules tend to stay in the realm of what you believe rather than what you do. The rule is this: never make a significant decision when you are at the low point of the emotional cycle of a difficult project. Every difficult project has an emotional cycle. There are periods of energy and clarity when the direction feels right and the work feels powerful. There are periods of doubt and fatigue when the work feels futile and the direction feels uncertain. The decision made during the doubt period about whether to continue is almost always the wrong decision, not because continuing is always right, but because the doubt period distorts the evaluation. The evidence looks worse during the doubt period than it actually is, because the emotional weight of the fatigue is being added to the evidential weight of the analysis, and the two are being treated as the same thing when they are not. Wait until the energy period returns before making the decision. If the direction still looks wrong during the energy period, if the specific evidence examined without the fatigue still points to a fundamental problem, then the evaluation is probably accurate and the decision to change course is probably right. But decisions made in the doubt period about fundamental direction have a very poor track record. I made several of them. Every one of them that I acted on cost me something I did not need to lose. Every one of them that I waited on revealed itself as fatigue when the energy returned. When you feel the pull to make a significant direction change, write down the specific reasons, not the feelings, the specific reasons, the evidence that the direction is wrong, the concrete problems that have not been solved, the measurable indicators that the approach is not working. Then put the paper away and wait 5 days. On the 6th day, read the paper again. The specific reasons that were actually about evidence will still look like specific reasons. The ones that were about fatigue will look smaller than they did when you wrote them. Act on the evidence. Give the fatigue its 5 days and then let it pass. That 5-day rule has a specific mechanism worth understanding, because if you understand why it works, you will be more likely to actually use it rather than treating it as a vague recommendation to wait before deciding. Emotional weight of a doubt period has a half-life. The specific feeling of discouragement, of being unable to see why the direction is right, of being tired enough that the evidence looks worse than it is, that feeling dissipates at roughly the rate that the specific stressor producing it is no longer at peak intensity. In most cases, the peak of the doubt period lasts 1 to 3 days and then begins to ease. By day 5, the emotional component of the evaluation has decreased enough that the remaining assessment is closer to actual evidence than it was on day 1. What you will find on day 6, when you read the list of specific reasons you wrote on day 1, is that some of them look exactly as compelling as they did when you wrote them. Those are the ones about evidence. They did not change between day 1 and day 6 because they were not emotional. They were observations about specific things that are not working. Those deserve action. The others, the ones that look devastating on day 1 and look manageable on day 6, those were the doubt talking. They deserve the 5 days of distance. Act on the evidence. Give the rest its time to pass. The things that are still there after 5 days are real. Money is the 8th thing, and I want to state it differently from the way it usually gets stated. Most advice about money is about how to get more of it. This is not that kind of advice. The most important thing I learned about money is that money follows production the way rain follows weather. When the conditions are right, it arrives, and arguing with the sky about whether it should rain is a waste of the time you could be spending creating the conditions. The man who focuses on the production, on making something that solves a real problem for real people, well enough and at a price that works, does not need to focus primarily on the money. The money is the consequence of the production working. The man who focuses on the money directly tends to make decisions that compromise the production in order to improve the margin, which degrades the thing that was producing the money, which reduces the money. Build something that works. Build it for people who need it to work. Build it at a price that is fair relative to what it produces for them. The money follows from the quality of the production and the scale at which it reaches people who need it. This is not mysticism. It is a description of how value creation works in practice. The quality of the thing creates the reputation. The reputation creates the reach. The reach creates the scale. The scale creates the returns. Compromise the quality to increase the short-term margin, and you compromise the foundation of the entire sequence. 9 is something most builders discover too late, not because the lesson is hidden, but because applying it requires a patience that the urgency of early building does not naturally produce. My $5 wage in 1914 is a good example of what I mean when I say money follows production rather than preceding it. When I announced the wage, the first reaction from the broader industry was that I had lost my judgment. The second reaction from the economists and financial advisors who analyzed it was that the numbers did not work and the wage would have to be reversed within the year. Neither of those reactions was wrong from within the frame they were using, which was the frame of margin management. From within that frame, increasing the wage substantially while maintaining price was a decision that compressed margin with no obvious compensating mechanism. It looked like financial error. Missing from that frame was the production improvement that arrived with the wage. Turnover, which had been a severe and expensive operational problem. We were losing workers at a rate that required constant retraining and produced constant quality. Inconsistency dropped dramatically within months of the wage. Change. The workers who stayed were workers who had made a choice to stay, which meant they were the workers who wanted to be there rather than the workers who had no alternative yet. Workers who want to be somewhere bring different attention to the work than workers who are there because they have not left yet. The quality improved. the throughput improved, the cost of the training cycle dropped. None of these effects were visible to the people assessing the wage from the outside because they were internal operational effects. And internal operational effects are invisible until they show up in the outputs over time. That wage paid for itself before the year was out, not because I was generous. Because the production improvement that followed from treating the people doing the production as the valuable resource they were changed the economics in the direction that the margin-only frame could not have predicted. 9 is specific and practical, and I want to state it as a rule. Stop explaining your direction to people who are not in it with you. Not because secrecy is a virtue, not because other people's perspectives are worthless, but because the explaining consumes the building time, and the explaining to people who are not building what you are building produces reactions that are almost never more useful than the time the explaining took. There is a specific way this works that most people do not notice. When you explain a direction that does not yet exist as a visible thing, the person you are explaining it to evaluates it against their existing frame of what is realistic and what is not. Their frame is built from what they have seen succeed and fail, which is the visible past. Your direction, if it is worth building, is probably something that has not been clearly seen succeed yet. Otherwise, the problem it solves would already be solved. The reaction you receive from the explanation is therefore a reaction from a frame that does not include the evidence that would validate your direction, because that evidence is what you are in the process of building. The explanation gets evaluated against the wrong frame and receives a negative reaction that is not really about your direction. Then you spend time managing that reaction. Then you adjust the direction based on feedback that was not actually about the direction. Make the thing. When it exists, show it. The thing makes the case better than any explanation of the thing ever could. There is an emotional cost to not explaining the direction to people whose opinion matters to you, and I want to acknowledge it rather than dismiss it. The desire to have the people you respect understand what you are building and believe in it is real and legitimate. Being understood by people who matter to you is one of the things that makes difficult work feel worth doing. I am not telling you to stop wanting that. I am telling you that seeking it before the building is complete is seeking it at the wrong time, from a frame that cannot yet hold what the building will eventually show. Showing the progress is the specific alternative to explaining the direction, not the plan, the progress. Not where the building is going, where the building actually is today, the specific part that now exists that did not exist last month. Showing progress is different from explaining direction. Direction is theoretical until the building makes it concrete. Progress is concrete. When the people whose opinion matters to you can see specific evidence of movement. The question of whether the direction is right gets replaced by the question of how far the building has come, and that question has a visible answer that requires no argument. Showing progress also has a secondary benefit that explaining direction does not. It produces accountability in a specific and useful form. When you have shown progress last month, you are implicitly committed to being able to show progress next month. The people whose opinion matters to you are now observers of the building rather than evaluators of the plan. That position produces encouragement more reliably than skepticism. Show the building. Not by talking about what it will be, by showing what it is, specifically, today. 10 is the one I said makes all the others possible, and I meant what I said. It is not dramatic. It is not the kind of thing that sounds like a revelation when you hear it for the first time. But without it, the other 9 are advice you agree with and do not apply. With it, the other 9 become the shape of how you actually live. So here is what it is. The direction you are building toward has to be yours, not the direction that sounds most impressive when you describe it to someone whose opinion you care about. Not the direction that is most socially legible as ambitious and serious. The direction that you would still be building in if nobody ever found out about it, if no recognition ever came from it, if the people whose respect you value most never knew it existed. That direction, because that is the only direction where the sustained effort is actually available. A note on how to know when you have found the 10th thing direction rather than another impressive sounding one. The test is not excitement. Exciting directions are often the ones that produce the most performance and the least building. Because excitement is partly a social feeling, it contains within it an awareness of how the direction looks to others. The 10th thing direction may or may not be exciting. What it is, without exception, is specific. You can describe what it produces. You can name who it serves. You can say what the specific problem is that it addresses. The directions that are genuinely yours have that specificity naturally, because they have been developing in you for long enough to have acquired detail. The directions borrowed from what seems appropriately ambitious tend to stay general, because they were never really being developed, they were being imagined. Specific. Specific is the test. If you can describe it in 2 sentences with real concrete detail, you are close to the real one. If it stays general, no matter how long you think about it, keep looking. Finding the direction that has this quality, the one you would build regardless of recognition, is not something most people do by thinking about it. The thinking produces answers that are contaminated by what sounds right, what seems appropriately ambitious, what the kind of person you want to be seen as would be building. The actual answer lives underneath those layers, and it requires a specific kind of stillness to access it. Finding it has a specific texture in practice. It tends to arrive not as an exciting revelation, but as a quiet recognition, a sense of returning to something already known, rather than discovering something new. The direction you would build, regardless of recognition, is almost always something you have already been drawn to, in some form, for longer than you have acknowledged. It is the thing you find yourself thinking about when you have not decided to think about anything. It is the problem you keep noticing, even when you have not gone looking for problems. It is the thing you would explain to someone, if asked, with more specific detail and more genuine energy than anything else you could talk about, not because you have rehearsed the explanation, but because the specific details are already there, already alive in how you think about it. That quality, the already there-ness of it, the sense that this has been the direction for longer than you have been officially building in it, is the indicator you are looking for. Not excitement, not ambition, the quiet, specific knowledge of what you would be doing if everything else fell away. Sustained effort across the years it takes to build it is too large to be sustained by external approval. External approval fluctuates. The days when the building is invisible, the days when the progress is underground, the days when the doubt period arrives and the evidence looks worse than it is on all those days. Approval from external sources is absent because the visible output that attracts approval is absent. The only sustaining force available during those days is the internal one, the specific conviction that the direction is right for reasons that have nothing to do with what it will look like to other people when it is done. I built the cars because I believed, without needing the belief confirmed by anyone else, that reliable personal transportation would change the quality of life for people who had never had access to it. I held that belief through 2 company failures. I held it through years when the people around me had more reasons to doubt it than to share it. The belief was not public, it was not performed, it was the private operating principle of the building, and it was available on the worst days because it did not depend on the best days to sustain it. Find the direction that has that quality, the one you would build regardless. That is the direction worth the full commitment of the one life you have to build with. Everything else is a good use of time until you find it, and a waste of time after. Here is the practical exercise for the 10th thing, and it is the most important exercise in this entire message. Sit with this question for 20 minutes, without writing anything, without speaking to anyone, without reaching for any distraction. If no one would ever know about what you built, and no recognition of any kind would ever come from it, what would you still choose to build? Not because you have to, not because it makes sense economically, because the building of it is the thing you would choose to do with your time if the approval was permanently removed from the equation. Write the answer when it arrives. It may not arrive in 20 minutes. It may take several sessions. But it will arrive, and when it does, you will recognize it because it will feel different from every other direction you have considered less exciting in the way that performance feels exciting, and more settled in the way that certainty feels settled. That answer is your direction. The other 9 things are how you build in it. Spend a few days with this. Come back and listen again when you have had time to sit with the 10th thing. 10 things. I started with that and I will end with it. Not as a list to memorize, as a structure to return to. The first thing distinguish building days from maintenance days is the daily practice that makes the other 9 possible. Without it, all the rest is intention without action. The second and third who you listen to and how you evaluate criticism are how you keep the building pointing in a real direction rather than in the direction of the loudest voice in the room. The fourth, the underground phase, is how you stay in the building when it is most tempting to leave it, during the period when the work is real and the results are invisible. The fifth, protecting the life the building is supposed to serve, is the one I most wish I had understood before I had to learn it the way I learn it earlier than I did. The sixth, sequential over simultaneous, is how you actually finish things rather than perpetually beginning them. The seventh, timing of significant decisions, is how you avoid making permanent changes based on temporary conditions. The eighth, money follows production, is how you build something real rather than something that looks profitable before it is actually valuable. The ninth, stop explaining, start showing, is how you spend the building energy on building rather than on managing the audience for the building. The 10th, the direction that is genuinely yours, is the one that makes all the others sustainable across the years that real building requires. Without it, the 9 are a set of good practices. With it, they are the description of how a life of real building actually works. None of these are ideas to agree with and file away. They are practices to apply today, specifically in the actual hours of the actual day you are in. The agreement is easy. The application is where the life changes. Come back to this tomorrow. The second time, at least one of these will mean something different than it did today. Subscribe and come back for what's next.